My name is Brooke Thompson. I am 32 years old. My husband had been secretly plotting to seize control of every dollar I had earned and the charity I built by convincing everyone I was mentally breaking down. The betrayal crushed me instantly, making me question a decade of love and trust in one horrifying moment. It exploded at the charity gala I organized in Jackson for women's support programs. My husband stood up after my speech, took the mic, and announced with feigned worry, "Friends, I adore my wife, but Brooke has shown increasing confusion and bad decisions lately. For her safety and the future of this cause, I must step in to manage things." My mother-in-law nodded without speaking as the crowd murmured. Pain hit hard, yet I calmly accepted the papers he pushed forward and silently vowed to turn his scheme against him. He had no clue the trap I was about to spring. If you've ever sat there smiling while your own husband tried to strip away everything you built right in front of people who were supposed to love you, drop your city in the comments below. Let me know I'm not alone in feeling that knife twist. And if you're watching from somewhere in Mississippi tonight, hit subscribe because stories like this remind us that quiet strength can still win. That gala night in the warm Mississippi air still plays in my head like a movie I can't pause. The pavilion lights twinkled over the tables, loaded with donations and finger foods, and everyone clapped after my speech about helping women rebuild their lives. I had poured 3 years into this charity, turning a small office on the edge of Jackson into a place where ladies could find legal help, counseling, and job training after tough marriages or financial messes. My husband had smiled through the whole event up until that moment, but looking back, I see how every smile had been calculated. He had started the pressure months earlier, little comments about how stressed I looked managing the charity and our household. "You're caring too much, Brooke," he would say, while we sat on the porch of our modest suburban home, the kind with a white fence and azaleas that bloom bright in spring. At first, I thought he was being protective, the way any husband might be after 10 years together. But then, the late nights began the unexplained withdrawals from our joint account and the way he would steer conversations toward how maybe I needed a break from decision making. I brushed it off because love makes you give people the benefit of the doubt, doesn't it? The next morning after the gala, I sat at our kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold in my hands. My husband walked in, still wearing the suit from the night before his tie loosened, like he had stayed up planning. "We need to talk about those papers," he said, voice smooth as always. "It's not about taking anything from you. It's about protecting what we built together." I looked at him and felt that same sharp pain from the night before, but I kept my face calm the way I had practiced in the mirror for weeks. What he didn't know was that I had already started watching him closer. 2 weeks before the gala, my best friend, Lauren Hayes, had pulled me aside after one of our coffee meetups downtown. Lauren works at the same community center where my charity holds workshops, and she has a way of noticing things others miss. "Brooke, something feels off with Ryan lately," she told me, her eyes serious over her latte. "I overheard him on the phone in the parking lot last week, talking about conservatorship forms in your charity's accounts." That conversation hit me like cold water, but it also lit the spark. I decided right then I wouldn't confront him yet. Instead, I reached out to Marcus Reed, a sharp attorney friend of Lauren's who specializes in family and financial cases here in Jackson. Marcus met me at a quiet cafe near the Capitol building the very next day. He listened without interrupting while I laid out the strange bank statements and the way my husband had started pushing me to rest more. "This sounds like classic coercion," Marcus said, his voice low and steady. "We can start building a file quietly, hidden recordings if needed, but only where legal. You stay one step ahead." I left that meeting feeling a mix of fear and something stronger, like the first real breath I had taken in months. That was my first mini cliff right there, because I had no idea how deep the planning went until Lauren texted me a week later with a photo of an email she had accidentally seen on my husband's open laptop during a family dinner. The email was from my mother-in-law, and it mentioned the doctor friend who can sign off on the evaluation, and how it would be best to act soon before the charity's next big fundraiser. My hands shook reading it on my phone in the car. I forwarded it straight to Marcus, and he called back within minutes. This is evidence, Brooke, but we need more. Keep pretending everything is fine. Let him think you're cracking under the pressure. I agreed, but inside my stomach twisted because my sister Olivia had been at that same dinner and never said a word when my mother-in-law steered the conversation toward how overwhelmed I seemed. My sister had always been the one who stayed quiet during a family tension, but this silence felt heavier than usual. The days after the gala blurred together with more small tests from my husband. He would casually mention how the charity books looked messy when he glanced at them, or how maybe I should let him handle the next board meeting. Each time I nodded and smiled, playing the part of the tired wife who appreciated the help. Lauren came over one evening with takeout and sat on my back porch while the cicadas hummed loud in the Mississippi night. "He's not just after the money," she whispered. "He's been talking to your father-in-law about getting a second opinion from some specialist. Marcus thinks they might try to push an involuntary evaluation if you don't sign voluntarily." The conversation left me staring at the dark yard for a long time after she left, wondering how long this had been building right under my roof. Marcus called the following afternoon with another update that raised the stakes even higher. "I pulled some public records on the financial advisor your husband uses," he said. "There's a pattern of debts piling up, and it looks like he's been moving funds around in ways that could collapse if the charity stays in your name." I thanked him and hung up, but my mind raced because the next evening, my husband suggested we have a quiet family meeting at the house to clear the air. His tone was too casual, too rehearsed, and I knew this was the moment he planned to bring in more pressure with my in-laws present. I told Lauren and Marcus I would record every word if possible. They both warned me to be careful, but I could hear the edge in their voices. That call ended on a note that still gives me chills when I remember it, because Marcus added, "Whatever happens at that meeting, Brooke, we now have enough to protect you legally. But once you push back, there's no going back to the way things were." I sat alone in my living room. After that, the papers from the gala still folded on the coffee table, and I realized the trap I had started setting was about to snap shut one way or another. The family meeting was the night everything started to crack open, wider than I ever imagined, though I kept my face as neutral as possible while they all filed in through the front door of our modest Birmingham home with its creaky wooden floors and the faint smell of the coffee I had brewed to keep my hands busy. My husband took the lead right away, pulling out the same papers from the gala and sliding them across the coffee table toward me as my mother-in-law and my sister settled onto the couch with their usual quiet nods. "Brooke, we've been worried about you for a while now," he said, his voice dripping with that practiced concern that always cut deeper than any shout ever could. "You're not the steady woman I married anymore. The charity is running you ragged, and your decisions are getting sloppy enough that the whole thing could collapse if we don't step in soon." Those words landed like a slap I couldn't dodge, especially with my mother-in-law murmuring agreement right behind him and my sister staying silent in the corner, eyes fixed on her lap, like she always did when tension rose. I sat there listening, heart hammering, but I didn't argue back yet, because Marcus had drilled into me that playing along was the only way to gather what we needed. My husband kept pushing, leaning forward, with that sharp little smile he reserved for moments when he thought he had the upper hand. "Just sign these and let me handle the finances and the board meetings for a bit. It's not control, it's love, Brooke. Or are you too confused these days to see that the jab stung because it twisted everything I had built into something fragile and foolish?" And in that second, I felt the old doubt creep in again, wondering if maybe he was right, and I really was cracking under the weight of it all. I signed nothing that night, of course, but I let my hands tremble just enough to sell the act, while I murmured something vague about needing time to think. My mother-in-law patted my knee, then her touch cold and performative. "We only want what's best for the family, dear. Your husband has always been the strong one. My sister finally spoke up after that, her voice soft, but laced with the same edge she had used since we were kids. Yeah, Brooke, maybe listen for once before everything you work for slips away. Their words piled on top of each other, each one chipping away at the confidence I had spent years rebuilding after my own rough patches. And I realized right there how deep the dislike ran, not just from my husband, but how he had turned the rest of them into echoes of his plan. The meeting dragged on for another hour, with more of those careful suggestions about rest and evaluations, but the whole time I kept the little recorder Marcus had given me tucked in my pocket, capturing every cutting line. When they finally left, the house felt heavier than before, like the air itself was waiting for the next blow. I waited until the taillights disappeared down the street before I called Marcus, my voice shaking for real this time as I played him the recording over the phone. That's solid escalation, he said quietly, the kind of steady tone that kept me grounded. Your husband just handed us the proof of coercion on a platter. But Brooke, there's more. We need to move faster because Lauren dug up something today that changes the stakes. Lauren had texted me earlier that afternoon from the community center, her message short and urgent. She had overheard my husband on another call mentioning large debts tied to some side investments that were about to come due, the kind that could drag the charity down with him if he got his hands on the accounts. Hearing it confirmed over the line from Marcus made my stomach drop because it meant the pressure wasn't just about control anymore. It was survival for him and destruction for me if I didn't stay one step ahead. The next few days turned into a careful dance of pretending while the trap tightened. My husband came home from work each evening with fresh reminders, always starting the conversation himself like he owned the script. I saw the bank alerts again. Brooke, he would say over dinner, his fork pausing midair for emphasis. You transferred another chunk to that shelter fund without running it by me first. That kind of scatterbrain move is exactly why we need those papers signed soon before you lose the whole operation and we lose our house along with it. Each jab landed sharper than the last, laced with that underlying resentment I could finally hear clearly. Now the way he had always quietly resented how the charity gave me purpose outside of being just his wife. I nodded along every time, even let a tear slip once or twice to keep him believing I was wearing down. But inside, I was feeding every detail straight to Marcus and Lauren. My best friend started coming over more often under the excuse of planning the next fundraiser, and during one of those afternoons, she slipped me a printed bank statement she had managed to pull from a shared file my husband thought was private. Look at these transfers, she whispered while we sat at the kitchen island. He's been siphoning small amounts for months, framing it as helping the family. Your husband's not just controlling, he's desperate, and desperate people get sloppy. That discovery led to another late night call with Marcus, where he laid out the next layer. We've got enough now to involve a detective quietly, he told me. Detective Klein at the local fraud unit owes me a favor from an old case, and she's already agreed to review the records off the books. But Brooke, your husband mentioned bringing in a doctor friend next week for a casual chat. If that happens, the timeline accelerates, and we might have to spring the trap sooner than planned. The news hit me with a fresh wave of fear, mixed with that strange thrill of watching his own plan start to backfire, because I knew from the recordings that my husband truly believed I was too weak to fight back. My sister called me the following morning, her voice hesitant, but still carrying that familiar loyalty to him. He's really worried about you. You know, she said. Maybe just sign something small to ease his mind before things get worse. I thanked her politely and hung up, but the call left me staring at the phone for a long minute, realizing how completely he had isolated me even from her. Lauren stopped by again that same evening with fresh coffee and a look that told me she had more bad news. We sat on the back steps as the Alabama twilight settled in, and she handed me her phone, showing a screenshot from an email chain my husband had accidentally left open on their shared family account. He's coordinating with your mother-in-law on the exact wording for the guardianship petition, she said, voice low. They're planning to frame it as you being overwhelmed and a risk to the charity's donors. Your husband wrote the first draft himself. The words blurred on the screen because that was the moment the full weight settled in how long he had disliked the independent woman I had become, how he had turned my own family against the very thing that made me strong. I forwarded everything to Marcus right there, and his reply came back almost instantly. This is the turning point. We schedule the counter move for next weekend when he pushes the doctor meeting. Stay calm, but know that once we expose it, your life here changes forever. No more pretending. That text sat in my inbox like a live wire because I understood exactly what it meant. The trap was ready, but closing it would mean burning the bridge with my husband, my mother-in-law, and my sister all at once. And I had no idea yet if I would walk away with anything left of the life I had built. My husband came home later that night, whistling like nothing was wrong, already starting another round of his gentle pressure over a reheated dinner. We're almost at the end of this stress. Brooke, he said, eyes locking on mine with that same cutting confidence. Just one more signature, and everything goes back to how it should be. I smiled back weakly, but inside I felt the countdown ticking louder than ever because the evidence was stacked and the detective was waiting, and the moment he realized I had never been the broken one in this marriage, everything he thought he controlled was about to shatter in his hands. What happened next at that doctor meeting still keeps me up some nights, wondering how close I came to losing it all before I turned the tables completely. The doctor meeting was the night everything came to a head, and I still remember the way my husband opened the door with that confident stride, inviting the so-called specialist inside like he was bringing salvation. He wasted no time taking charge right there in our living room, gesturing for the man in the crisp suit to sit, while my mother-in-law and my sister watched from the couch with those same expectant looks they had worn at the gala. Brooke, you've been slipping for months now, making one reckless call after another with the charity funds. My husband said, his voice smooth, but laced with that familiar cutting edge that always aimed straight for my confidence. This doctor is here to give us an honest evaluation so we can finally protect what matters before your confusion costs us everything. The words hung there like a challenge, and the specialist nodded along, already pulling out his clipboard as if the decision was made. My stomach tightened because I could see the script unfolding exactly as Marcus had warned. But I kept my breathing steady and let my husband keep talking, pushing harder with every sentence. You used to be so sharp, Brooke, but lately it's like you can't even manage a simple board vote without second guessing yourself. He added, eyes locked on mine with that sarcastic little tilt of his head. Sign the papers tonight and let the professionals handle it. Or do you really want to drag the charity down just to prove you're still in control? My sister shifted uncomfortably, but stayed quiet at first, while my mother-in-law murmured agreement, and the room felt smaller with every jab he threw. That was the moment the first real cliffhanger hit me, because I had the recorder running in my pocket and everywhere was being captured. Yet I still wondered if it would be enough when my husband leaned in closer and whispered just loud enough for the others to hear. Face it, you're not the woman I married anymore. You need this. The specialist started asking his loaded questions about my memory lapses and impulsive decisions, and the pressure built so fast I almost missed the soft knock at the back door. Lauren slipped in first, her face pale but determined, followed by Marcus, carrying a thick folder and a detective I had never met before. My husband froze mid-sentence, the color draining from his face, as Marcus stepped forward and said calmly, Brooke, we have everything we need now. Detective Lopez is here to listen. The second mini cliffhanger came when Marcus hit play on his tablet, and the recordings filled the room. Every gala jab, every late night demand, every coordinated email my husband had thought was hidden. My husband tried to laugh it off at first, turning to the specialist with a sharp, "This is ridiculous. She's clearly fabricating things again." But the detective cut him off by reading the preliminary charges aloud: fraud and coercion tied to the charity accounts. Lauren stood beside me the whole time, squeezing my hand when my mother in law started sputtering about misunderstandings. And my sister finally spoke up with a shaky voice. "Wait, this can't be right." But the evidence kept rolling, and the specialist turned out to be exactly the kind of paid expert Marcus had suspected all along. In the hours that followed, everything unraveled faster than I had dared hope. The detective took statements right there, while my husband's mask slipped completely, his usual sarcasm turning to desperate excuses that only dug him deeper. By the end of the night, he was facing real consequences: temporary freezing of joint accounts, and a court date that would decide the rest, and the charity stayed firmly in my name because the board, led by our director, Karen Ellis, who had quietly reviewed the same records earlier that week, stood behind me 100%. My mother in law and my sister left without another word, the door closing behind them with a finality that still echoes in my chest. I won the fight to keep what I had built, but the cost settled in heavy the next morning when the divorce papers arrived and my phone stayed silent from the family that had chosen his side for so long. The months after that meeting brought a strange kind of peace mixed with the kind of emptiness you can't fill with work alone. I kept the charity running stronger than ever, adding new programs for women navigating the same quiet control I had escaped, and Lauren and Marcus became the steady support I never knew I needed. Karen joined us for strategy sessions at the office downtown, her sharp insights helping turn the near disaster into real growth for the organization. Yet every time I passed the empty spot at the dinner table or saw a photo of my sister's kids I hadn't seen in months, the loss hit fresh. My husband fought the charges for a while, but eventually took a plea that kept him out of prison but stripped him of any claim to the charity or our shared life. And the last conversation we ever had ended with him saying, "You never appreciated what I was trying to do for us," before walking away for good. I appreciated the freedom instead, even if it came wrapped in loneliness. Looking back now, I realized the real trap wasn't the one he set for me, but the one I quietly built by refusing to stay small. It cost me the marriage I once believed in and the family ties I thought were unbreakable. Yet it gave me back the version of myself that had been fading under his constant jabs and demands. The charity is thriving. The women we help tell me their own stories of breaking free, and I wake up each day knowing I chose the harder path, but the right one. There are still quiet nights when the irreversible parts ache, but they remind me that protecting my peace was worth every piece I had to let go. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever felt your husband slowly trying to shrink you down until you almost disappeared, or if you're wondering whether standing up is worth the family you might lose, drop a comment and tell me what you would have done in my place. I read every single one, and knowing I'm not alone makes the bittersweet parts a little easier to carry.